Okay. Um, Thanks to everyone for joining us this evening. My name is Jara Fal. I'm a traffic engineer representing NDOT to show you some ideas we have to make your neighborhood a little bit safer with some traffic calming. So we're at the Dove Creek Road meeting and it's being hosted on WebEx. So we'll start out by going through some background information. We're going to start by talking about the 3 E's of traffic calming, which are education, enforcement, and engineering. This process that we're in right now is really focusing on the engineering side. Unfortunately, we can't run around with handcuffs and pull people over for speeding in your neighborhood, but we can try and make it a little bit safer through some engineering concepts. So we'll be going through that this evening. So what is traffic calming? This program focuses on residential streets, which are typically the ones that they're not the major arterials that are moving large volumes of cars from place to place. They're the ones that are getting people that last stretch to their houses from those larger main roads. We implement physical solutions to reduce speeds, and we don't really do spot measures. We're usually working on a pretty significant length of road. So here's some more detail about the neighborhood street traffic calming program that NDOT runs. It's a street program, not a neighborhood program. So in our prioritization, we're selecting specific streets to work on versus working on like a full area at once. We implement devices to reduce speeds and increase safety, and we have limited resources, so we have to really carefully prioritize the projects that we do to make sure that we're getting the biggest bang for our buck in terms of the impact that we're able to have throughout Nashville. But the traffic calming program isn't the only way that you can improve your neighborhood. There's Hub Nashville, which is the one-stop shop for pretty much anything you might want to request from Metro or NDOT specifically. If there are potholes, if you want a stop sign, things of that nature, that's where you want to refer those sorts of things. Walk and Bike Nashville is another great resource. We have Anna Dearman's contact information on the screen. She's the one who will be able to help you if you want to get bike lanes or sidewalks or something like that installed in your neighborhood. There's also the Beautification Commission. We have JD Lane's information on the screen, and they'll be able to get you information on the Adopt a Street program, community service, neighborhood cleanups, things like that, anything to make your neighborhood more pleasant and aesthetically pleasing. So now we're going to dive into the process of prioritizing. So this is how our projects are selected. We have a lot of demand throughout Metro Nashville. As of July of this year, we had 426 neighborhood streets that have applied for the program. And so every cycle we select around 25. This cycle we selected 27 neighborhood streets to work on. And so now I'll go into a little bit of how we go about prioritizing. I see a question about whether the slides will be available. The recording of the presentation will be available after the call. So you'll be able to rewatch all of this.
Hi, all. Quickly, I was just going to answer that. My name is Gil Thomas. I'm the program manager with NDOT. My email will be at the end of this. If you'll just shoot me an email, I can easily get these slides over to you at that point.
Oh, sorry. I only introduced myself. I'm joined tonight by one of my colleagues and also Gil Thomas. So Laura, if you want to introduce yourself, go ahead.
Yes. Hi, I'm Laura Kelly. I'm monitoring the chat and taking some notes too. So I also work with Jara and part of the NDOT traffic calming program.
Yeah, and then as Gil said, he's the program manager from NDOT. So we'll carry on. So yeah, this is how we prioritize which streets we're going to be working on each cycle. So there's a 100-point maximum, and this pie chart shows how those 100 points are divided up. So we're looking at the measured speed. So we're comparing the 85th percentile speed, which is basically a measure of what what speed 85% of the cars are going slower than. So there are always going to be some outliers. There's going to be someone who's racing down a neighborhood street at like 70 miles per hour or something. We don't want to let those outliers skew our numbers. So we're really looking for like how fast are most people going. And so we compare that to the posted speed limit, and that takes up 50% of our prioritization metric. And then we're looking at crash history. We're reviewing 5 years of crashes. We're looking at active transportation. So we're looking for whether or not you have sidewalks. Do people have any other option other than to walk in the street directly in contact with cars? And then we're looking for neighborhood destinations. We're looking to see, are there places that people are going to be encouraged to walk near their houses? Are there libraries? Are there schools? Are there parks? Things of that nature. And so we use that to prioritize all of the streets that are in our program. And with that, we end up making selections. And so, for example, in your application, there were 3 streets. One of them was scored high enough on that rating that it made it into this cycle. And that was Dove Creek Road from Country Way Road to Mount View Road. And so the other 2 streets, Seasons Drive and Huntingborough Trail, those didn't make it in this cycle, but we keep them in the prioritization spreadsheet. And so they might be selected next cycle or perhaps the cycle after. We don't toss streets out. And after 2 years, you can request that we collect new data and reevaluate your street. So yeah, so just because a street wasn't selected doesn't mean it will never get traffic calming. Okay, and this is just a map view of basically what I just explained, showing the street that was selected in this cycle, and then the other 2 that were not, that are still in our prioritization spreadsheet. I'm hearing a little bit of background noise. I think someone may have accidentally come off mute. But this is a great time to take a pause anyway. If anyone has any questions about our process and how we make our selections or the program in general before we go into some common traffic calming measures.
Hi, this is Therese Gooch. I do have a question. In response to what you just said about the 2 streets that weren't selected in our neighborhoods, do we have to keep applying every time, or because they were already on your prioritization list, do you just vote on them later, or what's that process?
So basically we have like a massive spreadsheet where we keep all of the data that we collect, because we have we take measurements for things like the 85th percentile speed and things of that nature for each street that's on our spreadsheet. And so the top 25 are selected for the cycle, and then all the ones that are left just move into the next cycle, and then new applications are added, and then we reprioritize to see where everything falls. So you don't have to reapply. It's still going to be in there. We're going to reevaluate it every cycle. But if you want to see updated data, because like maybe a new development comes in your neighborhood, and so you have more people in the area or something like that, every couple of years, if you request that we do that, we will collect new data to make sure we're using the most up-to-date information to evaluate your street.
Okay, so if we wanted to see if 1 or 2 of the other streets fall into, what's selected, where would we go and get that information, and what frequency would we need to check it? Annually?
So there are 2 selections every year, usually one in the winter and one in the summer. Gil, do you have more information about where those selections are posted?
Yeah, so whenever those selections are announced, we will post them. We'll have a news letter go out, and we also contact all of our applicants and council members directly whose projects are chosen. As far as keeping up to date on where these other streets currently stand, I don't have that information in front of me, but again, my email will be at the end of this presentation. Feel free to shoot me an email, and I can look more into where these currently stand and get an idea about when we need to be reapplying to get more numbers and things along those lines.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Do we have any other questions before we move on? Okay, if not, we'll move into an overview of some common traffic calming measures. This is basically our toolbox. It's what you'll mostly see us use on all of our projects. So we'll start out with speed cushions, which are kind of the bread and butter of our program. You're going to see a lot of these popping up around town as a lot of our projects are installed. There are these rubberized cushions that go in the roadway, and they're not to be confused with speed bumps, like the ones that you go over in a parking lot. These are a lot more subtle to go over, but they ensure that you're not racing down a street. It's a vertical measure that ensures that people are slowing down as they're passing through a neighborhood. Because ideally, we want to keep people, like, ideally no one gets hit with a car as they're walking, but if they do, you'll have much better odds if the car is going maybe 10 or 15 miles an hour. So we want to get speeds down pretty low on a neighborhood street where people are walking their dogs or kids are playing or things of that nature are going on. So next up, we have signage and markings. On the left, you'll see a radar feedback sign. Those are usually accompanied by like a static speed limit sign. And so it lets you compare the speed that you're going with the speed limit of the area that you're driving through. And it's a visual reminder because people aren't always looking at their speedometers of how fast they're going versus how fast they should be going. And so it encourages you to slow down. It's kind of like a public announcement of how fast you're going down a street. And then we have various markings that we use to call attention to the drivers, call the driver's attention to what they're doing, and make sure that they're being careful as they're driving through a neighborhood. Next up, we have narrowing. So these are going to be pavement markings that are used to visually narrow the street that you're driving through, because people tend to drive more slowly through narrow roadways. If you think about it, when there's a lot of pavement, you kind of feel like there's nothing to hit around you and you can fly down a street if it's pretty straight and wide. So we want to narrow that a little bit and make people, again, just focus a little more as they're driving, be a little more careful. And so that's what we're trying to accomplish with narrowing in various ways. Next up, we have speed tables. These are very similar to the speed cushions in that they're a rubberized vertical measure that are placed in the roadway. We use these less frequently than we use the speed cushions because the speed cushions have those gaps in between them that make them a little bit easier on large vehicles like ambulances and buses and things of that nature that may need to get through a neighborhood street. And then we have traffic circles. Sometimes when an intersection is really large, and again, there's a lot of pavement, people maybe take the turns a little faster than they should. So we put up a traffic circle that's, again, like a vertical sort of obstacle for people to drive around rather than just flying through an intersection. Again, it makes them slow down, makes them have to focus as they're driving a little bit harder. We also use chicanes. And so chicanes can be either painted or they can be like a concrete sort of installation. There are a few spots around town where you can see chicanes in action. But again, it's just making it so that the road isn't just a straight shot that people can fly down. They have to kind of zigzag down the road. And again, just making the drive just that much more challenging so that people are inclined to pay attention to what they're doing. So does anybody have any questions about the measures that I just went over? If not, we can talk a little bit more about the flow of the program and where you guys are right now. And then we'll go into what the concept is for your street, what we've come up with to try and help your street be a little bit safer.
I have a question.
Oh,
So is
go
there
ahead.
a concept of how you choose which measures that you will use? I heard you say all of the measures that are possible.
Mhm.
So are you about to tell us how you all come up with which one would work best on our street?
Yeah. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the flow of our program, and then I'll be showing you the concept that we've come up with for your street. And during that, I can make sure that I go into a little bit of why we chose that for you guys.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So right now we're at meeting 1, but before we got here, someone in your neighborhood applied. We take applications 2 times per year. And then after we get all the applications in, we do data collection, we measure speeds and volumes, and we look into the characteristics of the streets that were selected. And then we prioritize. And then we're at meeting 1 now, which you all must have gotten mailers that directed you to this meeting. And now I'm giving you an overview of the program and the concept. And then after this meeting, we'll take your feedback and we'll go into a more detailed design process. And then we'll schedule a second meeting with you all. And during that meeting, we'll have a more detailed design to show you. And we'll take some more feedback and we'll tell you all about the balloting process and the next steps. And then it will go to voting, where each of you will receive another postcard. So 3 postcards total for this process. And that postcard will be your ballot, where you'll have a 6-week window to vote. And in order for the measures to be implemented, 66% of the respondents have to vote yes, because you'll have the option to vote yes or no on the measures. And then if the ballot is successful, then it'll go to construction and we'll order materials and install the devices on your street. If not, then we'll reevaluate and try to figure something else out. Looks like someone has raised their hand. Or not. Okay, so now we'll go into.
Sorry, I'm sorry. So what I'm hearing you say is if people are not responsive to the postcards, then that could potentially defeat this going into place.
Yes. So essentially, we need 66% of respondents. So it's just of all the people who actually vote on it, kind of like a regular election. It's just the ballots are counted by who actually voted, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so two questions. Since this is within an HOA community, is it possible, Gil, for me to be notified as the HOA president so I can make sure that the people on that street are reminded of the voting? And then in general, I would love to know what percentage of requests or applications have not been fulfilled with some kind of traffic calming measure because the people didn't vote to approve it.
Yeah, I mean, I know I sound like a broken record, but if you'll just shoot me an email after this, I can definitely make sure you're kept in the loop on all of these things, as well as up to date on voting as we go through. Usually, as far as voting updates, I provide those on it's kind of like an at request. So if someone reaches out wanting to know where the vote is, I can provide an update along the lines of how many votes we have and where that currently stands, if that makes sense. But yeah, I can for sure get you in the loop if you're not already on all these email correspondence around this proposal.
I've been in the loop, but I did have to request a letter, et cetera, because I don't actually live on that street. But I would like to make sure that the HOA is included in all that. So I will make sure I send you an email after this meeting.
Yeah, that sounds perfect.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And then the bigger question, I guess I can put that in the email too, because I would love to know over the last 2 years, like what percentage of the requests didn't get fulfilled because the neighborhoods didn't respond affirmatively, because that just could be people not responding in email or in mail. So I'll put that request out there too.
I can actually answer that briefly. So we actually have just started this balloting process in the last few months. So we've completed, I don't know the exact number, it's north of 30, 35 ballots at this point. And as of this morning, we're at like a 91% pass rate. So it has been a positive outlook as far as our voting.
Okay, thank you, Gil.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, So now we can talk a bit about the concept that we're proposing for your street. We went with speed cushions, and so I'll talk a little bit about why we went with that. So for some of the measures, like chicanes, for example, you need a very wide roadway in order to be able to get that zigzag going in a safe manner. Your street is about 30 feet wide for most of the stretch that we're working on. And so it's not quite wide enough for us to be able to do chicanes or something like that. Narrowing, for example, we wouldn't be able to narrow the street significantly enough for it to make an impact. Again, like if we're doing narrowing or chicanes, we're looking for extremely wide roads. Your road, if it's about 30 feet wide from end to end, that's roughly 15 feet lanes. And so that's just not quite wide enough for us to use those measures effectively. And then again, speed cushions allow larger vehicles to pass over them a bit more easily than something like a speed table that stretches all the way across the roadway. So if you look at the image in the upper left-hand corner, we're looking to use like a 3 across probably, 3 speed cushions in each grouping. That's again because of the width of your street. We have to make sure that we're not, if we put 2, people would be able to like drive around them or drive through them. And so 3 will kind of blanket the road enough that the average passenger car would have to pass directly over the cushion and slow down to be able to comfortably pass over them. So that's a bit of an explanation of why we went with what we did. So we've already done a site visit for your street and took some measurements. So that's why I know the width of your street. I don't just know it off the top of my head. But also we took some grade measurements to make sure that your road was flat enough for these cushions to go in safely. And so, yeah, so that's why we went with speed cushions. And these are the placements that we're thinking for now. Again, as we do the more in-depth design, we'll have more exact locations for where they'll be. But in placing them, some of the things we're looking for are where there's enough space between driveways so that we're not putting a cushion directly in front of someone's driveway. Making sure that they're far enough away from an intersection so that people aren't like rounding a curve, rounding a curve directly onto a speed cushion that they might not be expecting, because we usually provide signage in advance of them to let people know that they're coming. And then we don't want to put them on a hill that's too steep or in the middle of a curve where people are already navigating some sort of obstacle in the road. And then we're adding a cushion that's just making it way too difficult and unsafe where they might lose control. So yeah, so this is the concept that we came up with. Does anybody have any questions about it? And again, my contact info and Gil's contact info will be at the end of this presentation. So if you come up with any questions later, feel free to reach out to either of us. And now I want to explain a little bit about how the voting happens. So again, to be at this meeting, you probably got a postcard in the mail. So I'm just showing you where those postcards were sent and who will be voting on this project. So it's homeowners that have properties that have frontage on the project road, so Dove Creek Road. And so we rule out things like churches or businesses. It has to be a residential address. So this is just highlighting the extents of the addresses we pulled. And then we kind of go through and make sure that we're just sending the information and ballots out to homeowners. So does anyone have any questions on that part of the process? Okay. If not, does anyone have any questions in general? And again, if you think of any questions at a later date, Gil's email address is on the screen as well as mine. I'm Jara Fell, and I'm your project engineer for your street. So yeah, you can reach out to either of us whenever.
Yeah, I'll just reiterate what Jara's saying. If anyone has any questions, would like any further information, or would just like to provide any feedback on the current concept, feel free to send me or Jara an email, and we will address it accordingly. But thank you all for your time, and thank you all for joining us tonight. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah. And if there's nothing in the chat, I guess we'll wrap up. Thanks everyone for logging on. I look forward to serving your community.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you.